Hello, tiny people. Enough of that weekend nonsense. Let's get back to some serious history. I know. They make you take a couple of days off every week. It's that's terrible. I'm sorry. So let's get back to it. All right, today's lesson: Iraq, Taylor Johnson, and arithmetic. That's not the Rock. That's not Dwayne Johnson. That's a different Johnson. We're talking about Taylor Johnson. This will be the Rock, Taylor, and arithmetic. Battle of Chickamauga, which is in south central Tennessee. And this is one of those words, again, you have to say with a southern accent. So let's all say it Chickamauga. Chickamauga. September 19th and 20th, 1863. The Confederate commander, and notice again, I got that little CSA after his name, so you remember, is a man named Braxton Bragg, who did not go down in the annals of history as a great commander. As a matter of fact, he was later labeled the Southern McClellan. He had opportunities here which he did not follow through on because he thought he should wait until he had more. The commander for the North was the little guy up in the top of the box, who is William Tecumseh Sherman, who will later be one of the two great commanders of the North. The main guy in the box, though, is General George Thomas, because this is the place where he becomes the Rock of Chickamauga. This is the fellow from the Virginia family who he was the only one of the sons who went and fought for the Union. All of his brothers fought for the Confederacy. So Mama had turned his picture against the wall because she couldn't look at her Yankee son. But after this battle, when he distinguished himself, she became a fan again and turned his picture back out so people could see she was a proud mama. At the Battle of Chickamauga, Braxton Bragg routed the Federals. That is, he totally defeated the North and they went running. Now, I was at the Chickamauga battlefield just a few years ago. Fascinating stories. It's deep woods. There's rock formations. It's in a hilly area. It's a terrible place to try to figure out where people are. And one of the rangers that was escorting around on the tour I was with said that it was called the fog of war. Not only at that particular part in the Tennessee mountains was there a serious morning fog when this began, but also with the smoke of the weapons firing and some burning in the forested areas, that the two sides really had absolutely no idea where the other people were. And there was a story recounted by one of the soldiers who had taken part for the North, who said that his commander had them build a wall. So they had built this wall as a defense, and then he saw the commander flip a coin. And what he was actually doing was trying to figure out which side of the wall they ought to go onto, because they had no idea where the friendlies were and where the enemy was. Anyway, the Federal Army was routed off of that, and they were being pinned down. At a place called Chattanooga, a little bit further south down in Tennessee. And Chattanooga, the Army sent help. It sent a lot of help. The Union commander had said, "Hey, please, we need something here. We are outnumbered. We are outgunned. Give us something." Well, Ulysses Grant had finished up. He'd taken Vicksburg in July. And so he and a large portion of his army came north in order to join with William Sherman. And he arrived in time and he took overall command because he outranked Sherman. William Sherman was to Ulysses Grant during the Civil War what Stonewall Jackson had been to Robert E. Lee. They understood each other. They worked very much as a team. They were extremely loyal to each other. And so Sherman would become Grant's right-hand man, and Grant would become the great general of the North. Well, what you're looking at on the right there is a place called Missionary Ridge, a part of where the battle took place. And this was a particularly fearsome entrenchment by the Confederates. You're looking at the hill there, and up at the top, they had cannons, and they dug in fortifications, and they had men stationed. Down at the bottom, they had put down cannons, and they built fortifications. They had men stationed, and it looked like a really impossible task. But what Grant wanted a particular group from Wisconsin to do, yay, Wisconsin, was to run across this field and take the entrenchments down at the bottom of the hill. This is kind of what Missionary Ridge looks like from the top. This is up near the Confederate fortifications at the top. Well, the Union soldiers from Wisconsin were supposed to go only as far as the bottom of the ridge. But this fellow off on the right, his name is Arthur MacArthur. I love that name, Arthur MacArthur. You might have heard of his son, General Douglas MacArthur, one of the two highest ranking commanders in World War II for the Americans, actually for the Allies. And anyway, this was Arthur MacArthur. He was only a first lieutenant at Missionary Ridge, but he, when they stopped at the bottom, decided that was not enough. And some of the men kept going, and Arthur MacArthur grabbed the flag, and he started up the hill, and he shouted. You guys know what he shouted? Come on. Come on. Think of Taylor. What did he shout? Can you figure out what he shouted? That would be, "On Wisconsin!" And that's where our state's motto comes from. So all you Badger fans, now you know something that a lot of people from Wisconsin don't know. Anyway, the Wisconsin boys ran up the hill, took the Confederate positions at the top also, the boys from Wisconsin, I said, and they broke the Confederate line, chased the rebels away, and it was a Union victory. Matter of fact, Braxton Bragg's army retreated all the way back down into Georgia. But after this, where they were screaming on Miss Johnson, they named a street after Taylor. No, wait. I'm sorry. It was on Wisconsin. Anyway, Lincoln finally had found the right commanders. He gave Ulysses Grant overall command. CO means commanding officer. Overall command of all the northern armies. All of them, everywhere, from the furthest reaches of Texas all the way over to Washington, D.C., everything in between. Grant knew that with communications what they were in that day, he couldn't lead all of the armies himself. So he took his most trusted man, William Tecumseh Sherman, and said, "Sherman, you're running the West. I'm in command, but you're my guy for all the stuff that's going to happen out in the western part of this war." Grant understood something that changed the course of the war a bit. He understood that there are two ways to win a war. The first way is to wreck the Southern economy, to wreck the enemy's economy. That's what the Anaconda Plan had been designed to do. The North would not give up on the Anaconda Plan. They continued to use it. They continued to strangle the South economically. But Grant said there's this other thing that we can do. Not only kill the enemy's economy, you kill the enemy's army. When they run out of soldiers, they can't fight you. This is called the arithmetic of war. And simply put, it is when one side has so many more soldiers than the other side, then it really doesn't matter in each battle if it's a loss or a victory, as long as you're killing people from the other side. So Grant said, look, our job is not to win battles. It's great if we do, and we certainly want to. But our job is to kill as many Confederates as we possibly can. And so Grant divided up the forces and he said, Sherman, you are going to come from the west and you are going to march east toward Atlanta. I'm going to put another supporting army of about 40,000 men on each side of you. So that's 180,000 men marching forward toward Atlanta. And I'm doing this, I want you to go to Atlanta only because I think Joe Johnston, who had the second largest Confederate army, will come out and fight you and try to stop you from getting to Atlanta because it's so important a city for the Confederacy. So Sherman was going toward Atlanta, but he's after killing Confederates. And if Joe Johnston had run up to Chicago or out west to Arizona, then William Sherman would have followed him and continued the fight because he didn't really care about Atlanta. What he cared about was killing Joe Johnston's army. And I'm going to stop for a second again for this brother versus brother thing, because this is the flip side of it. This is one of the most amazing things. For the rest of the Civil War, Joe Johnston and William Sherman would fight each other. They fought each other for the better part of a year. And they were bitter rivals, bitter enemies in war, but they greatly respected each other. And when William Sherman died years after the war, General Joseph Johnston, the Confederate general, was one of his pallbearers. And when someone asked, why would you do that? Joe Johnston replied, because he'd do it for me. All right, so Sherman is going to go kill Joe Johnston's army. And on the other side, George Gordon Meade, who still has the Army of the Potomac, is going to go toward Atlanta. That's not right. Toward Richmond with 120,000 men. Please make sure you understand. He's going towards Richmond from Washington. And he also has two supporting armies of about 40,000 men each. That's 200,000 men. At the time, Robert E. Lee's army had about 65,000 people. Joe Johnston's about 50,000 people. So you're talking with Joe Johnston, 50,000 versus 180. With George Meade, or with Robert E. Lee, you have about 70,000 versus 200,000. And the idea, remember, is not to take Atlanta, and it's not to take Richmond. The idea is to kill Confederate soldiers. Just to get you on the map so we're all in the right position here, the purplish, pinkish arrow, that's Sherman coming from the west. Remember, the North now has control of Vicksburg and the Mississippi River. He's going to march straight toward Atlanta, hoping that Joe Johnston will continue to fight him so he can kill soldiers. And up the blue arrow is George Meade and Ulysses Grant. Ulysses Grant traveled with the Army of the Potomac. In name, Meade was still commander of the army. He'd done a great job. He beat Lee at Gettysburg. But Grant could go anywhere he wanted to. He was in control of all the armies. So yes, Meade was in command of the army, but Grant was standing right next to him, and Grant was Meade's boss. On May 4th, 1864, the six armies, Sherman with two supporting armies and Meade with two supporting armies, started off simultaneously. Finally, Lincoln had his wish of trying to overwhelm the South just purely by numbers. The North had finally figured out how to use the advantages that they had. All right, tiny people. I sent to your parents on Friday an email which has in it a link to a little excerpt from the movie Cold Mountain about a part of the Battle of Petersburg called The Agony in the Crater. I'm going to be talking about that tomorrow in Tuesday's lesson. I would like it, please, if you have permission from your parents, for you to get the link from them, and then you could watch that. Watch it with them if you want to. It's a very good reenactment of battle. It is violent, it is bloody, it is potentially upsetting. So that's why I want your parents to give you permission. They are your primary educator, and nobody loves you like parents do. So, all right, tiny people, we will talk at you tomorrow. Until then, remember to thank Taylor Johnson when you see her. And once again, we'll pipe you out here with